Here, make Knock it off at your
Pittsburgh
change result.
is no
Restart.
result.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Analysis with Ro. I'm your host, Ro, giving you the latest in everything media, or whatever media I feel like talking about. And we are back, talking about the one and only elusive Hisoka Moro. Right, we're going to discuss his childhood, and we're really going to get into the last aspect of Unit 1. I know, everyone, we're going to also miss Unit 1. I am especially. Discussing and inferencing about his childhood has been fun, but we must move on to Unit 2, which will be even better. It's his teenhood. So I'm excited to get into that pretty soon. But right now, we're going to go into the last chapter, which is discussing his mental health. So everything involving his early mentalities and kind of forming the mindset that he has and anything else that has to do with his mind. So this is kind of the early premonitions of all of that. We're going to get into that and so much more within this chapter. And today we're going to be discussing the first part of this chapter, which will be theorizing about the potential of him having ADHD and how that kind of affected his childhood. So we're going to get into that sort of theory / inferencing today. And then we're going to move on to conduct disorder, which is the childhood version of ASPD. And we'll move on from there. Yeah, guys, we're going to have so much fun. And we are going to have an absolute ball with everything. But I can't believe pretty much it's almost over. It's Unit 2, and then Unit 3 is going to be the last unit. So I hope you guys enjoy, and let's get on started. All right, let's go on ahead and get started. So the early mental health of Hisoka Moro. See, a crucial aspect to examine when discussing Hisoka is, of course, the evolution of his mental health issues that have been prominent throughout the entire series. See, the thing is, along with a lot of other things that we've talked about, certain philosophies that he might believe in, certain maybe religious or spiritual practices that might have started off when he was younger, Nen even. The same thing goes for mental health issues, right? It starts when you're young, and some people, possibly for this character as well, it arguably starts at birth, right? Certain aspects of the mind that might be tampered with, that might be, not added to usual, not neurotypical, as some would say. It really starts to appear at a young age. So with this character, it's no different. It's better to track that early rather than later, right? So this has been a prominent feature throughout the series for him, but where did it begin? That's really where we're going to start answering that question. It's like, where did it start? Most likely in his youth. These psychological challenges also tend to shed a light on his complex and often unsettling behavior, which then provides deeper insight into his motivations and actions throughout the entire Hunter x Hunter series. So you really got to understand, it's like, why are you like that? Why are you this way? Well, perhaps we should start from the beginning. With a lot of people, arguably all people, you got to start from the beginning. Childhood. So this will provide context for all of that. And then by understanding these intricacies of his mental state, we can also better grasp the nuances that drives his unique character and his unpredictable interactions with other people. Because again, it's like, why are you this way? We might be able to find that answer if we can heavily predict and inference, same thing, predict inference, where it all began and where it all came from, using the little clues that we do have about his childhood. We're going to get into all of those aspects and more within this chapter, which of course is the last chapter for Hisoka's childhood before we get into Unit 2, which is teenhood. Today, we're going to be discussing the first aspect of this chapter, which is more so around his neurodivergency, his potential neurodivergency. I do feel like that's a huge aspect, and the potential one that I've theorized for him to have is like ADHD. This is comorbid, aka mixed with ASPD, which I will discuss, or at least the early aspects of ASPD, in the next portion of this chapter. So that's going to be part 2 of the last section of this chapter. Of course, we're going to be talking about conduct disorder, which is more so around ASPD or the early signs of ASPDs. But today, we're going to be talking about ADHD. So let's go on ahead and dive right into it. All right, before we get into how ADHD pertains to Hisoka specifically, we kind of got to know what ADHD even is, right? Right. So let's talk about that. What is ADHD? Well, to put it simply, ADHD is otherwise known as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. See, ADHD is its acronym, and that's its long name. It is a brain-based or neurodevelopmental disorder that can make it difficult for a child or adult, though adults are slightly different, to sit still and concentrate, and is typically noticeable before the age of 6, meaning Hisoka's mom had to deal with a lot, too. There are typically 3 types of ADHD, which are ADHD type 1, which is the combined presentation, is the most prevalent subtype. See, children diagnosed with this type demonstrate a combination of impulsive hyperactivity or hyperactive, as well as attentive behavior. These individuals often experience difficulties in sustaining attention and are prone to distractions, which can significantly impact their academic and social functioning. We have type 2, which is characterized by the impulsive and hyperactivation. This is known as also the least prevalent subtype of the disorder. Children exhibiting this type of ADHD are typically hyperactive and impulsive. However, they do not experience difficulties with attention. Then you have type 3, which is the inattentive subtype. Now, this one is characterized by a predominance of inattentiveness. So, in other words, they tend to be very distractible. And of course, children with this subtype often struggle to maintain and focus on certain tasks. They have focus difficulties with following instructions, and they sustain attention in various settings, probably most likely due to hyperfixations. But if it doesn't pertain to hyperfixation, we'll talk more about what that is in Unit 2, then they're not focusing. So that's inattentiveness. So if you're wondering, it's kind of on and off with like the attentions, like attention in certain areas but not in others. Yeah, hyperfixations are probably the main reason why that tends to be, which is more so things that pertain to certain interests and things of that nature. Now with ASD, we did talk about hyperfixations a bit, but they have slight differences in presentation, of course, ASD being autism spectrum disorder. Those have slight differences with ADHD. So we're going to talk about more of the ADHD aspect of that in Unit 2, more so than we are going to in Unit 1. But yeah, that's pretty much it. It's like spotty focus. It's like it's not really as strong of a foundation with type 3 ADHD. So again, attentiveness, it's like the focus is kind of all over the place. That's really what you need to know. Now, we also have symptoms of ADHD. Now, do you know what they are in the 3 different types? Because it's also on a spectrum. I will say slightly different to ASD. Again, autism spectrum disorder, but it is still a spectrum nonetheless. It just has a slight difference in it. We're also going to talk about the symptoms. So let's get into that. Symptoms of ADHD. See, ADHD has a weird but interesting way of classifying their symptoms because they have 3 symptoms, but they also are a thing called subsymptoms. So subsymptoms are kind of additional aspects to the symptom. So if I say symptom and then subsymptom, that means there's more. And that's pretty much all that means. There's more, there's more, there's a surprise. So that's what that means. ADHD has 3. This is what we've talked about before, but we're going to get more into that now. Inattention. impulsivity, hyperactivity. Put it in your brain, put it in your notebook. These are the 3 symptoms. We're going to be talking about those and their subsymptoms. So basically, subsymptoms are what makes it count. Inattention and ADHD often manifests as difficulty concentrating on tasks or activities. Affected individuals may frequently lose focus during tasks that require sustained mental effort. There are the following subsymptoms that need to exist in order for it to kind of count. Has a short attention span for their age, has a hard time listening to others, has a hard time attending to details, can be easily distracted, can be forgetful, has poor organization skills for their age, and has poor study skills for their age. Now, one thing I will say is that even though you need all of these to count, certain people, specifically with Hisoka, will get more into this because they are more on the gifted end. They are considered high functioning slash high masking. I'm going to more so use the term high masking rather than high functioning because high functioning is kind of outdated. But high masking, so in other words, it's harder to tell because certain symptoms are disguised due to being more so on the gifted end. So if you're wondering why you probably can't see it all, that's pretty much the main reason. I had difficulties as well doing research until, I researched like, oh, what are gifted kids like with ADHD? And it's like a lot of the time they tend to mask their symptoms. And it's like, that's probably why it's harder to track. But it is there. It's just going to appear a bit more different than, say, somebody who is, to put it in very simple terms, no offense, normal. It's probably going to be easier to catch for a normal kid rather than a child who's classified as like gifted, quote unquote, higher intellect, even though I don't like describing it in that way. And the list goes on. So if you're wondering why, that's probably why. Hyperactivity, which is the second symptom, of course. This includes excessive movement and an inability to stay still. These behaviors are more noticeable and can be disruptive. These are the following subsymptoms. Seem to always be in motion, tends to run, climb at times with no clear goal. They tend to have a hard time sitting or staying in a seat when expected. They tend to fidget with their hands or squirm when in a seat. They tend to talk a lot. They have a hard time doing quiet activities. They tend to lose or forget things repeatedly and often. They are not able to stay on task, and they shift from one task to another without completing any. And those are all the subsymptoms for essentially hyperactivity. The last thing that we're going to be talking about as a symptom is impulsivity. Impulsivity in ADHD includes acting without thinking and often leads to hasty decisions that can result in negative outcomes. Quick reactions to immediate stimuli can be problematic. The following subsymptoms are often interrupts others, has a hard time waiting for their turn in school or social games, they tend to blurt out answers instead of waiting to be called on, and they take risks often and without thinking before acting. Sound familiar? Now you're starting to see. It's like, oh, it's starting to sound a bit familiar now. It's like, I get it now. It's like, yeah. It just takes a bit longer because of the gifted aspect, kind of being away like a shield, the whole thing. Along with the symptoms, we also have the final aspect for the symptoms, which is the diagnostic requirements. So these are additional things that pretty much psychologists would say counts or signs to look for as, somebody has essentially ADHD. It's like, oh, we saw this and this and this kind of behavior. It's like maybe they have it, right? It's like this is not 100% concrete. But at the same time, I would say that this has a good 80%, 90% because it's psychologist approved. All right. So these are also some diagnostic requirements, again, to properly classify what type of ADHD might be presented. So not only is it saying like, oh, hey, you might have it, here's the specific type that you might have. So we will mainly be using this as a guide to see which one that Hisoka has. Now, the types of severity and the essentials are the 2 factors that should be taken into account when diagnosing ADHD in the first place. So let's explore that, because that's what we're going to be using as a rubric. These are the types of severity as well. you have mild, which means few, if any, symptoms in excess of those required to make the diagnosis are present, and symptoms result in no more than minor impairments in social or occupational functioning. In other words, mild ADHD. Moderate ADHD are symptoms or functions impairments between mild and severe that are present. I predicted, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this prediction, that Hisoka is more so on this end. He has moderate, which is like depending on the situation, it could be like a mild sign. It's like, oh, it's not that bad. And then you have more on the severe end, especially when it tends to be comorbid with what would later be his ASPD. It's like, oh, it's at its absolute worst. So it's like, mild and then severe. It's like it's at its peak, and then it's at a moment where it's like, it's not that bad. So I would say he's fairly on the moderate end. And then you have severe, which is many symptoms in excess of those required to make the diagnosis, or several symptoms that are particularly severe or present, or symptoms that result in marked impairment in social or occupational function. So this is pretty much on the end of it's almost kind of debilitating in a way. And ADHD as a whole is a disability. It classifies as a disability in and of itself, but it has severities in said disability. But this is the severe end, so this is probably someone who needs obviously a lot more help. This is somewhat similar, but it has, of course, that difference to ASD. With ASD, the severity is a lot more in the different end. I would say with ADHD, though everybody's different, it is more on the spectrum and it depends on the individual. With ADHD, I will say that it's not apparent, even if it is severe, that someone needs more help with their day-to-day things. Because of the symptoms, it could come across as like something else, essentially, for people. It's harder to catch versus with like ASD, it's easier to, figure out if it's mild or severe. And with severe, it's like, oh, they have severe autism, they need more help. It's more obvious for certain people. Neurodivergencies, the brain, it's a whole interesting aspect. But for some people, especially people who may have not have dealt with, neurodivergencies, it's like, unfortunately, and this is also partly due to ableism, it could be like that particular person kind of annoys me. And it's like, why? And they tell you why. And it's like, I don't think they're trying to annoy you. I think that person might be just legitimately disabled. Have you considered that? With ADHD, it's a little bit harder for people to consider. And yeah, that's really the main three types of severity. So severe is more on the serious end. Then you have moderate, which it tends to go back and forth between mild and severe, which is where I predict Hisoka would be. And then you have mild, which is like, it's not that bad most of the time. The essentials. So this is another aspect to consider. So the essential features of attention deficit / hyperactivity disorder is a persistent pattern of inattention and or hyperactivity / impulsivity that tends to interfere with functioning or development. See, ADHD begins in childhood with the requirement that severe symptoms start between the ages of 12 and I guess 14. So it really starts being present before the age of 12. So I would say 10 to 12. I said 12 or 14. It's 10 to 12, guys. And typically it can be recognized by the age of 4. So by 4, so in other words, again, so his mom had to deal with a lot. By 4, your child acting a certain way, maybe bouncing off the walls, is that and the fourth. All the symptoms that we've talked about. You might be wondering what's going on. It could be ADHD. Or as a classic SNL skit once said, my child likes to jump. It's like, yeah, that's probably why. I remember that as an old skit. It's so funny. It's recent, obviously. It's like the Pedro Pascal one. And it's like, that's the first one I thought of. But it's like, my child likes to jump. It's like, girl, it's ADHD. But now we understand the criteria for an ADHD diagnosis. We can then make an informed assumption about what Hisoka's variant of ADHD is. So we now know everything of the symptoms and what it is and all the information about it, we can get into the second aspect of this episode, which is okay, what variant is Hisoga's? What are we dealing with here for him? And I'm just going to say that it appears that Hisoga exhibits a combination of moderate ADHD, of course, have a comorbidity with conduct disorder, which we will talk about later, along with aspects of giftedness that again may mask certain aspects and certain symptoms of ADHD and sometimes conduct disorder as well. So, this complexity can make it a bit more challenging to arrive at a definitive diagnosis for him. However, there are some evidence from his pre-canon manga that may support this diagnosis, as well as some theories based on what his mother might have observed, which we'll be exploring in the next portion of this episode. But before we can do that, let's all take a little bit of a break. So we're going to come right back after this break, and we are going to be discussing part 2, which is everything pertaining to Hisoga and how he might have dealt with the early signs of ADHD. All right, we'll be right on back.
You know something that everybody needs, neurodiverse and otherwise? A nice, comfortable place to sleep. Well, with Cozy Earth, they can provide that and so much more. With their comfortable bamboo sheet sets that provide cooling comfort and unparalleled softness, along with their very cute pajama sets that bring a cozy elegance to a night's in, it's sure to be the utmost, most luxurious sleep that you've ever had. For free shipping on orders over $50 and easy returns, you can get the utmost comfortable sleep with Cozy Earth. For more information, click on the link down below.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back from the break. I'm glad that we all have enjoyed ourselves from the break, but we got to get right back into business. So let's go on ahead and talk about the evidence of ADHD in the pre-canon manga. So here's the thing, right? Because for his pre-canon manga, you're probably going to ask the following question, which is, why was this particular subsection so short? And the reason why is because a lot of the evidence for ADHD for pre-canon for Hisoga in particular, because of the fact that he's twice exceptional, in other words, gifted and has ADHD, we already talked about it in the education section due to the fact that he's twice exceptional. Because of that exception, no pun intended, we are only going to be talking about 2 more additional things that does not have to do with him being twice exceptional. So these are just normal ADHD symptoms that are not comorbid with giftedness. And then we're going to talk about, after, as a supplement, what Hisoga's mom might have dealt with during the time in which he was a child. So we're going to talk about both of those things combined, so it won't feel too short. One example that I will say for Hisoga exhibiting signs that are consistent with early ADHD can be found in page 17. When he demonstrated slight fidgeting with screws and cards, particularly in the context of constructing his card houses. This behavior may be interpreted as a form of hyperactivity, because hyperactivity is mostly about motion for the most part with ADHD. It's obviously more complicated than that, as we discussed with the symptoms and things of that nature. But to put it very simply, it is the motion part of it all, right? Keeping your hands and your body busy at all times. And again, mostly explaining the need for learning by kinesthetic and touch and things of that nature. We have talked about that before for the education portion. So this is just in addition to that, right? Like more signs of you seeing that, more so keeping the hands busy at all times, keeping the body moving at all times. These are just more signs of that add on to the ADHD potential diagnosis. So along with that, we also have another instance that could be viewed as indicative of ADHD, which occurs on page 20, in which Hisoga volunteers to take Kishida's place. His abrupt manner while doing that may perceive as rude to other people. So in other words,
when he was volunteering for Kishida, he kind of did like interrupt the conversation beforehand, and doing that, of course, is seen as socially inappropriate. Now, sometimes kids do that, but the thing about it with ADHD, right, it's about the frequency, like how many times it can be done. And it's like probably more than what is considered the norm to the point where it becomes irregular behavior, right? Something to keep note of and pay attention to. So that's just a small indication, but something tells me that that might not be the first time that that was done. So that's probably where the slight annoyance at a certain point comes from, because it's like repeated behavior. And if it is true that it's repeated behavior, it might be another sign, in addition to all of those other signs that we saw with showing twice exceptional traits back in the education section. So when he did volunteer again, it was deemed as rude because of how it was done, and it was deemed socially inappropriate. It's not a complete justification of the adults still acting weird towards him, because at the end of the day, they were not acting the way that you should for a kid. So, regardless, the adults were kind of, in the wrong. Still showed like high signs of jealousy during that time. So, like, even if there's overwhelming evidence for a neurodivergence being apparent, most adults hopefully would not act this way, but some do. There's some ableism, unfortunately, depending on which adult you end up talking to. It's a 50-50 toss-up. It really does depend on what person you meet. It sucks sometimes, it's great sometimes. Sometimes it's like, oh, this adult just straight up hates kids. Doesn't matter what kind of kid you are. It might be worse if you are a neurodivergent kid, but they already hated kids to begin with. And then you have some adults that are A-okay, cool with kids, whatever. It is a 50-50 toss-up, unfortunately, for a lot of Hisoka's life, with the exception of maybe his mom. You've met a lot of adults that were not so great, so there we go. But along with that, indication in page 17 and page 20, we also have some things that, speaking of his mother, we can infer that Hisoka's mother might have seen in the past that also indicated ADHD. So these are some other things that Hisoka's mom might have seen that indicated, oh yeah, this kid, he likes to jump, as the Petro Pascal SNL skit would say. It's like a little bit of a jumpy kid, if you will. In other words, a child with ADHD. So, one of the following traits in Hisoka that indicates ADHD is being disorganized and forgetful. So, this is one of the more so common traits. Hisoka's mother likely faced difficulties related to Hisoka's challenges with organization, including, but not limited to, the misplacement of items and the occasional lapse in remembering important dates. Now, this is also something that we do see in his adulthood as well. So, it could be a multitude of reasons. He has a crossing of reasons, so a lot of reasons as to why this happens. One of it could be legitimate ADHD. So, in other words, just being like, I wish I could remember events. I legit don't know how to do that. So it's like, are you trying to be cool and edgy? It's like, some people, they might interpret it that way, but honestly, it might not even be that. It might just be like, no, I just straight up forgot. And it's like, oh, good to know. That's just something you tend to do because of the way that your brain is wired. Okay, so yeah, remembering important events, lapse in judgment when it comes to that. So these issues may contribute a sense of slight stress and confusion, especially for maybe certain important events, right? Like back in the early days for his childhood, if they ever were to go to, for example, we talked about religious theories. So it's like, let's say, maybe go to mass every now and again, like Catholic mass, if every now and again in his earlier childhood. Like just kind of forgetting and being like, oh, is that what we have to do today? A little bit stressful. I don't know. It's like there's certain events where it's like a little bit stressful. It's like, oh, we got to do this thing, right? It's like we have to do this very important ritual right now. And it's like, really? Oh, I forgot. And it's like, you have to remember this thing that we need that's very important. It's like, go to the store and go buy this thing. And it's like, you come back and it's like, what's happening? Why didn't you buy this thing? Why did you buy this instead? And it's like, Mama, I'm gonna be so honest and for real, I forgot. So it's a little hard probably in that house because it's like we need these things. And it's like, oh, what am I gonna do with you, child? What am I gonna do with you, little boy? I can't believe it. It's like he tries his best, especially probably in the later years, in those kind of like last more depressed moments with his mom where she kind of got a bit sicker and sicker. It's like he tries his best, but it's a genuine struggle, right? It's like, because again, the wiring of somebody who has like ADHD, it's slightly different. It's like their brain can't help it. They'll try their best. There's certain ways to do it, but naturally, it's not the brain's inclination. And that's okay. There's ways around it, but ultimately, the brain wiring's just different. We also have number two, which is difficulty following instructions. So his mom may also have this struggle with Hisoka, which is difficulties following instructions and missing steps or misunderstanding tasks, which we still see him do. I would say for this one, it has that slight comorbidity with conduct / ASPD as well. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But for right now, without that comorbidity existing yet, difficulty following instructions is again that wiring for the brain slightly different. A lot of it could be due to executive dysfunction, particular avoidances in the brain. A lot of it's executive dysfunction from what I've learned. So there's difficulty following instructions, not without, trying at first, but just genuinely finding difficulty in it. The steps might be too long for the brain, so the brain's just like, I'm not listening because it's too long. It's considered repetitive. A lot of the times people who have ADHD, they have difficulties with repetitive things, right? So it's like, it's not a fun game, so to speak. So the brain just does not follow. It does not care for it. It does not want to do that. And that could cause some difficulty, again, when it comes to certain tasks at home. Being like, we have to do this, we have to wash dishes, we have to do all these things. And it's like, I don't want to do those things. But it's not because I actually don't want to do them. It's like, I probably do want to do them and finish them. But my brain tells me no. So knows what's going on, and that's frustrating, right, for other people, particularly people who don't have that kind of brain. But it can even be slightly frustrating for people who do have ADHD. So let's assume that the ADHD came from his mama, right? In other words, they both got it, which makes things 2 times as hard because we have essentially the older person, the adult in the situation, the adult in the room being like, we have to focus. And the other person's like, this, that, and the fourth, bouncing from the walls. They're a kid. They're going to do what kids do times 2 slightly, to be honest. And now it's a little bit hard to keep track and keep focus. And now we're completely off track. And it's like, oh my goodness, we're off track completely. That's kind of crazy. What are we going to do? So just kind of a crazy situation because I've learned with ADHD, obviously, it's genetic. Not even obviously. I think there's still studies about it. But for the most part, I think it's safe to assume it's genetic. There are some theories that it's genetic maternally, but I'm not going to say 100% on that. All I'm going to say it's genetic. So it depends on parent, just in general. Let's assume that it's his mother, right, that has said genes, passed it down. Now you got 2 people in the house that have this particular issue, though it shows in different ways because with ADHD for femme individuals, it is different from, masculine individuals. So I will say that much. But yeah, it's like 2 people trying to focus. They can't. So now everything's all over the place. It's a mess. It's disaster. It's crazy. You also got frequent interruptions. So Hisoka's mom might also have noticed her son interrupting her in conversations. She might not mind at first, again, for a multitude of issues, probably the main one being like she tends to do the same thing. And now it's a long conversation between her and her son, which at first seems so cute, so admirable, until you realize it's like 1 a.m. and you probably both need to sleep. So might not be an issue for her, but it can be an issue for like other people and other people that he'll interact with later, where it's like, that's cool, but I have different priorities, so it might not be as fun for them versus her and her son. We also have excessive movement or fidgeting. So his mom might also notice her son in a constant state of motion by fidgeting, tapping, or moving from place to place. Now, due to the fact that he does have education that does tend to prioritize that more so kinesthetic movement, if you will, even back when he was like quote unquote homeschooled by his mom, probably focused on him moving a lot anyway. So that was never really a problem for him per se. Maybe it became an issue later in adulthood / late teenhood, but at least in childhood, early teens, not really that big of a problem. People didn't care as much because the education was so individualized and focused to the point where that was not too much of a concern, but it probably have become more so of a concern later on. I will say that. So the last thing, besides the fidgeting and moving around, is the emotional dysregulation. Now, this is the hardest one, right? Because children typically don't have the best regulation in general. And being neurodivergent, again, tends to increase things slightly by 2. So you have this emotional dysregulation that later kind of gets slightly worse over time because of that conduct disorder. So after his mom passed away and the development of conduct kind of either began or worsened, depending, it caused the emotional dysregulation to get even worse. So with Hisoka's mother, what may have happened is that she may have been trying to challenge navigating difficult emotions with her child's behavior. And these difficult emotions, of course, it's like things like anger, things like maybe sadness, but sadness turned into anger, a lot of anger during this time. Along with that comes impulsiveness, right? And maybe somewhat destructive behavior, aggressive behavior, inappropriate actions. And this is like really hard and difficult to manage as is, but even more so difficult given like the gender that we are seeing this character present in. It can come off as like even more worse. So that might have been the hardest part. I would say for Hisoka's mom, it might not have been too much of an issue. It's probably every now and again, it's like only when he's angry kind of thing. From what I could see, at least during the pre-canon and maybe even beforehand, but pre-canon is enough to indicate it's like for the most part, calm kid, doesn't get angry too often, but every now and again it might appear. So it's not a frequent issue, but it is one where it's like if she had to deal with it, it's like, oh my god, props to her, because that could not have been easy to deal with at all. And that's probably all of the things that she has seen, like, as a mom during the time in which she was raising Hisoka. And again, she probably had certain traits as well. It's just that for her, probably just didn't have enough time to diagnose it at all, or enough time to really see it. But, certain things that she might have done might have made it more apparent to see where Hisoka got it from, because again, ADHD is more so genetic. And yeah, that really is it as far as what she's seen. And that's also really it for this entire section of the last chapter for Unit 1 when it comes to Hisoka and ADHD. So the next time when we come back for the next episode, we are going to be discussing Hisoka and conduct disorder, which you've heard a little bit about in this episode. And you guys are probably curious as to what conduct disorder is. I'll just put it into simple terms right now. We're going to talk even deeper about it in the next episode, but conduct disorder is pretty much just a childhood version of ASPD. So we're going to be talking about that and breaking down a couple of other things, and then moving on to the next parts of this entire unit, last part of the unit, and then that should be it. But yeah, the next episode is going to be all about conduct disorder. So once again, grab your notebooks, grab some snacks, because it's going to be another long one. And I will see you guys next time on Analysis with Ro.